Every couple of months, a new video goes viral of a young man or a young woman opening up their first paycheck from their first real job. Invariably, the excitement over that first step into financial adulthood is dimmed somewhat when they see the amount. The moment that benefits, deductions, and taxes become a reality is a weird combination of funny, endearing, and downright depressing. In that kid's mind, the math is simple. Something to the effect of, I worked 40 hours on this paycheck at a rate of $10 per hour, so this should be $400, right? Anything less feels like highway robbery. And while those videos are always a mix of entertaining and sympathetic, I think that a real narrative is formed in those crucial first seconds after opening that first paycheck. The simple idea that everything that's not on this paycheck was stolen by the government takes root. And for many people, they never dig deep enough to question that and to find out what really lives in the gap between their gross income and their take-home pay. Today, we're going to challenge that. The question we're asking today is extremely simple, but extremely important, and I think extremely misunderstood. Today on Trav Talks, where does my paycheck go? Let's not waste time and let's head straight into the information. I think this topic is best served by example, so let's jump right in and start there. Since almost everybody's situation is different in one way or another, we're going to set some assumptions for this analysis that let us explore the topic thoroughly, and then we'll talk about how other variables may impact what we're talking about in any given area. In this example, we're going to use a household with an even $100,000 per year income. If that's a single worker, that means about $48 an hour for about 2,000 hours a year. Very standard clocking stuff. We want to pick something that's fairly representative. $100,000 a year is not exorbitantly high, nor is it very low. And that's going to let us explore some things like tax brackets in a later analysis. Our household in question is a couple that is married filing jointly. Note that the breakout of the income could be 100 and 0, 50-50, or anywhere in between, and it really doesn't impact the results. We will also assume that this couple does not have any children. Put simply, the child tax credit is extremely lucrative and would kind of skew our results. We'll explore just how lucrative the child tax credit is also later on. Our couple will take the standard deduction rather than itemizing. Most taxpayers can choose between a standard deduction or listing out all of their various deductions, whichever one's most beneficial to them. The Trump Tax Act of 2017 widely expanded the standard deduction, which means that it applies to a whole lot, really most people. Either way, whether you're itemizing or taking the standard deduction, what matters is the total amount of the deduction, and so since most people use that, we'll stick with it for ease. Next, we'll assume that any working members of this family are employed by a company and are not self-employed or contractors. This actually makes a fairly dramatic difference on the outcomes because the Social Security and Medicare portions will be about half of what they would be for a self-employed or contract employee. The reason for this is that most employers who pay you on a W-2 pay half of your Social Security and Medicare for you. They get a tax break for doing so. While most companies pay these taxes for you, it's not usually shown on your paycheck. While this lowers the tax portion of our example pretty significantly, it's the case for most people, so that's what we'll use here. On investing, we'll assume that our couple pays into a traditional retirement account, whether 401k or IRA, as opposed to a Roth. The difference between these is that with traditional options, the money that you invest from your paycheck is deducted from your taxes that year, but then in retirement, when you draw that income, you have to pay taxes on it. As opposed to a Roth, where you pay with post-tax, after-tax dollars when you invest the money, but do not have to pay taxes on it again when you withdraw it in retirement. Simply put, we'll assume traditional because most companies offer traditional 401k options as opposed to Roths, although Roth offerings are expanding. But we'll use what is common for this example. Finally, for each of these numbers, we will look at per paycheck and per annual dollar amounts that go into each of these categories. For the per paycheck amounts, we're going to assume a pretty standard bi-weekly pay schedule, which means 26 total paychecks a year. If that doesn't match your situation, then just pay attention to the annual numbers or extrapolate to match your situation, whatever helps you visualize it best. The ratios of the money are all the same regardless of how you cut it. All right, so the foundation is laid. Now let's get on to the questions that we're going to ask. How much of my paycheck does the government take? What does the government spend it on? What other deductions or factors reduce my take-home pay? And the ultimate question that we want to answer with all of these building blocks is, where does my whole paycheck really go? Let's get into it. First, let's take a look at a sort of high-level, unrefined view of where the money goes. This is kind of the level of maturity that every kid gets when they crack open that first paycheck. In our example, they would earn $3,846 per paycheck, totaling up to $100,000 for the year. Out of that $3,846, $2,600 comes home and $1,245 is taken, stolen by the government or something. In a full year, out of $100,000 earned, about $68,000 comes home and $32,000 is lost. Let's start by saying this. At first blush, losing 32 cents on the dollar for a lifetime seems like a pretty bum deal. But stay with me, the picture gets a lot brighter when we add some context. Here we have the next level of maturity past the first paycheck kid. We'll break that lost money down into a few more discrete categories. The take-home pay or net income is of course the same, but now we've got a little bit more color and context on the 32 cents on the dollar that was lost. The first category is common benefits. This includes things that most people consider standard fare when they have employee benefits. Health insurance, vision insurance, and dental insurance. In this example, for a paycheck, we paid $119 for health insurance, $12 for dental, and $2 for vision. Of course, the bulk of that then is health insurance. Now, this is the first place where I need to stop and say, healthcare is a little trickier than it seems. Just like Social Security and Medicare amounts that are paid by your employer, health insurance contributions from your employer don't usually show up on your paycheck. But because I'm a huge nerd so that you don't necessarily have to be, I also know that in this case, this couple is paying about $500 per paycheck from their company for healthcare coverage. In other words, even though it's not visible on their paycheck, their health insurance costs $1,000 a month more than they think. It's just hidden because their employer pays it. You can check comparable plans at the Affordable Care Act website, healthcare.gov, and get an idea of what similar plans look like in terms of coverage and deductibles. Healthcare is a huge topic that deserves to be expanded on in another dedicated video. For now, just know that the main driver of the cost of common benefits is your health insurance, and we'll move on from there. The elective benefits category contains some things that you would still consider fairly recognizable, but maybe not standard. The main input here is a $100 per paycheck contribution to a health savings account, or HSA. The other $5 is for some supplemental life and disability coverage. Here again, there are some company contributions on these supplemental coverages for life and disability, but the values are so small that they don't really make a difference in the assessment. The real company contributions that matter for our analysis are the FICA taxes, Social Security and Medicare, as well as the company contribution to your healthcare. Next up is retirement. In this case, 8% of pay goes into a traditional 401k. And finally, what's left is a little bit over 18% that goes into taxes. So let's rewind for a minute. When we first started looking at this, our first paycheck kid perspective was that 32 cents on the dollar was lost to something, taxes or whatever. Now we've accounted for 14 of those 32 cents on the dollar that we lose, leaving about 18 cents unaccounted for. Those 14 cents that we're taking off the table go to benefits or retirement that the payer uses or keeps. But there's even more detail that we can go into. Let's keep going and see what's inside that 18 cents on the dollar that is still apparently lost. Up next, we're going to break the 18% that goes into taxes into 4 constituent parts. Here, we replace the 18-cent taxes category with 4 subcategories: Social Security, Medicare, federal, and state taxes. Social Security accounts for 5.8% of this paycheck. That's $224 per paycheck and $5,800 total dollars per year. It's actually a 6.2% flat tax, but deductions except for retirement contributions are reduced from the payable amount. In other words, your 401k contributions don't reduce your Social Security amount, but health insurance, benefits, anything else like that does reduce it. Medicare is calculated the same way. It's a 1.45% flat tax on gross income minus benefits, except for contributions to 401k. With our deductions in our example, that means it's 1.4% per paycheck, which is $52 per paycheck or about $1,400 per year. There is an interesting key difference between Social Security and Medicare taxes. Social Security taxes actually have an income limit, which means you can out-earn this tax. And the limit is not particularly high either, $142,800 in 2021. This is due to an odd historical fluke in how Social Security was created. Originally, President Roosevelt intended for high earners to be completely exempted from the bill. They wouldn't gain the benefits, but they also wouldn't have to pay into the system. During congressional deliberations, it was decided that all people would participate, but that there would be an income limit as well as a benefit limit. And here we stand today. What this means is that if you make less than the income limit, about 6 cents of every dollar is going to go to Social Security. But if you make much more, your marginal Social Security rate can actually be infinitely lower. At an income of $885,000, your Social Security would amount to a penny on the dollar versus 6 cents on the dollar for the rest of us. This is the literal definition of a regressive tax that benefits people earning more money. Even the staunchest proponents of a flat tax probably see this as backwards. On the flip side, since the benefit is capped, perhaps it's fair that the high earners don't have to pay in more than they can enjoy. After all, the original intent of the bill was that they wouldn't participate at all. So maybe it does make sense after all. I won't muddy the water with my personal opinion. You have the facts now, decide for yourself. But this does lead to a key question. So far in our 18 cents on the dollar analysis, we consider Medicare and Social Security to be lost income, missing or stolen. In fact, these two taxes are collectively known as the entitlements. That's a loaded word in our current political environment, and I think that it's seriously misunderstood in this context. Answer this question. Who is the entitled person in this transaction? You are. They're not called entitlements because the money goes from the hardworking to the lazy. They're called entitlements because you, the payer, are entitled to get your own money back. Now, you can dislike or disagree with these programs, but the simple fact is, if you plan to use Social Security or Medicare when you retire, you will get your contributions back. It's very much the same as a retirement benefit in this sense. The benefits are still yours, they're just delayed. Okay, that leaves only two categories. Federal income taxes, which in our example are about 7.7% of gross income. That's $295 a paycheck, or about $7,700 a year. The last is state taxes. For our example, I used my home state of Kansas, where I will use 3.4% of gross income, which is $130 per paycheck, or about $3,400 annually. State tax setups vary widely across the country. There are 8 states with no state taxes at all, 10 that employ a flat tax, and then the balance of the states use a smaller example of the graduated system that you experience at the federal level. We'll talk about that more in a moment, but for now it's safe to say that at this income level, what we have in our analysis is fairly representative. Some of the states with a graduated system have a very high income tax for very high earners. For example, New Jersey has a 10.75% maximum state tax, but you have to make more than $1 million to get there. The 3% or so in our example is fairly standard. You might experience a little less, a little bit more. So in the end, what we're left with is 11 cents on the dollar that really truly goes to taxes that don't provide direct benefits to you now or later on in life. Let's turn for a moment to view that visually. As a reminder, we started with the view that 32 cents on the dollar are lost or stolen or missing or something. When we refine it a little bit, we find that it's actually only 11 cents on the dollar that goes to things that don't directly benefit us, either now or deferred in the future. That seems like a much more fair allocation of our incomes. In this scenario, 68% of our pay comes directly home with each paycheck, the most clear and obvious example of a benefit directly to us. Past that, another 6% goes to benefits that we enjoy the coverage of in the here and now. Medical, dental, vision, disability, life insurance, plus an HSA, which, if you don't know, is like a tax-free savings account for medical expenses. If you have access to one, I highly suggest that you use it. After that, another 15% goes to benefits that you will enjoy in the future. About half of that is your retirement contributions that you can see and manage your investments in on a day-to-day basis as you go through your life. The other parts are Social Security and Medicare, which function similarly to retirement. You're paying in now for your experienced benefit later on in life. And by the way, if you're sitting on the retirement account balances of the median or normal American, you need it. Again, the purpose of this video isn't financial advice, but to the median American, I can safely say, you're not saving enough. If you want to gripe about government programs like Social Security, prove you don't need it. Then we can talk. What this leaves, finally, is the 11 cents that is well and truly lost to taxes. This is a much more refined and mature view than the first Paycheck kid view, where we think that we lose 1/3 of our paychecks for an entire lifetime to the government. But check it out. While we've done a lot of myth dispelling already, we can push it even further. See, while those 11 cents on the dollar that you pay to taxes might not be for your personal benefit, it does not mean that you don't personally benefit. While your Social Security and Medicare funds go to fund those programs specifically, your federal taxes go to the discretionary budget. So what does that pay for? Keeping with our same scenario before, here's a breakdown of where the $295 per paycheck or $7,700 per year in federal taxes go. The percentage listed are a percentage out of your gross pay. Another way of thinking about it is that the percentage represents the number of cents for every dollar that you pay for each of these items we're looking at. The defense budget accounts for a little over half of the discretionary budget. In other words, about 4 cents of every dollar goes towards defense spending. Now, we can have a good conversation about defense spending and whether it's used appropriately, whether it's the right amount, whether it's used efficiently. But for now, let's just say 4 cents on the dollar buys you the protection of the most powerful military force that has ever existed in the history of the human species. And though the specific amount is of course not defined in the Constitution, the preamble does say that one of the main responsibilities of the federal government is to provide for the common defense. So at least in principle, if not in value, this line item is totally justified. All that's left then is 3.79 cents on the dollar that goes to fund all of the federal government's contributions to these programs and services. Education, training, employment services, social services, transportation, veterans benefits and services, income security, health, justice, international affairs, natural resources, general science, space and technology, agriculture, energy, commerce, and more. Here again, you may not directly benefit from any of these, but think of how much you enjoy America's interstate highway infrastructure, how much you've enjoyed a national park, how much better everyone's society is that every child has free access to a high school education, how important our energy infrastructure is, or how much America's place as a world leader and provider of aid benefits all of our global influence. I also picked a few favorites to extract. On this $100,000 income, $165 per year goes to food stamps. $298 per year goes to foreign aid. Speaking for myself, I'd be happy to pay twice that if it ensures that kids at home and abroad have enough food to eat. And yes, charity and other organizations exist to help to alleviate some of those pains, but let's be clear about how much they actually cost before we complain about them. Oh hey, we didn't talk about tax deductions and credits. The key difference is that a deduction is used to reduce the amount of taxes that you owe by subtracting it from your top line income before you calculate your tax rate. In other words, a tax deduction is only as good as your marginal rate. It'd be 8 to 10 cents on the dollar for most people. A tax credit, on the other hand, is 100% effective. It directly reduces your tax burden 1-to-1 with a 100% effectiveness. In other words, a $1 tax credit is $1 less in taxes that you owe. The child tax credit is arguably the most common tax credit, and it's extremely valuable. Just to get a raw sense, for every child that you want to factor into this equation, take about 25% off of each of these line items. If our theoretical couple had 2 kids, everything on this chart would be cut clean in half. I'll discuss tax calculation and deductions a little bit more in another video here to come. Lastly, here's some information on the 3 cents a dollar that we spend on state taxes. By and large, education and healthcare are the leading expenses for your typical state. More information is provided in the sources, and of course you can look up your own state's budget if you want to learn even more finite detail of what you're spending on. Alright, so what am I really saying here? The main takeaway is that your opinion should be informed by knowledge. That knowledge and awareness empowers and illuminates what can otherwise be a dark or frustrating topic for a lot of people. I think that many people are philosophically and ideologically opposed to any taxes at all. Look, I like keeping my money. I want more of it. There's nothing wrong with that. I take all of the deductions and credits that are legally available to me. However, I do actually appreciate the taxes that I pay because I've looked into it and I understand what the benefits are. And even if it doesn't directly benefit me, it doesn't mean that I don't benefit in some tangible social way. And beyond that, the portion that you have to get all philosophical and mushy about is much less than you think at first blush. If you're the first paycheck kid, then you might think that a third of your entire paycheck is stolen. But realistically, it's just over 10% that goes to these intangible, indirect kind of things. The other 30 cents or so goes to things that are for your direct benefit, either now or in the future. In fact, it's a running joke or a running belief that the government is extremely inefficient on some of these things. I would be willing to pay more in taxes to support federal programs that are actually more efficient than a free market. That's not the case in many scenarios, and I'm a believer in free markets, but they are not perfect for every single situation or for every product. Heck, I would even pay a little bit more in taxes to make sure that the country is solvent for my children and grandchildren's generations. And that leads to some of the things that we didn't talk about in this video. Here are some of the unanswered questions that I'd like to tackle in the future. We looked at the amount we pay in a hypothetical scenario, but we left open some big questions on tax calculations that may help us better understand our own situation and the impact of policy proposals from our leadership. Questions like, how are my taxes calculated? How do tax brackets work? And how do deductions and credits work? Also just teased a moment ago is the question of how an individual's taxes tie into the federal debt or deficit. I talked in a previous video about the last several decades of the American economy and how the federal debt has grown or shrunk in that time, but we can connect those two to understand how we fit into that picture. Some relevant questions on that topic. What would higher taxes on high earners do? How much of the federal budget is paid by people versus companies? And what would it take to balance the budget? Finally, we really need a dedicated discussion on healthcare. For one, I don't think most people know how much they actually pay for health insurance. What does healthcare really cost? And what would be the impact of implementing a government-run healthcare program like Medicare for All? I always start these videos with the aim to make them shorter, and I always blow past my time limit. As always, the underlying goal is to take things that you might not look at very often, things that are important to your life, but that might be confusing or frustrating or difficult, and make them make a little bit more sense. Taxes can be complicated and frustrating because it feels like you're losing money that you have rightfully earned. My goal isn't necessarily to change your mind or persuade you on a topic or sell you on some set of beliefs. It's just to present some information that you may not have seen and help you think about these things from a fresh angle that you may not have taken for a long time. Anyway, as you can hopefully tell, I'm always working to improve the production value and the content in these videos. They take a colossal amount of research, scripting, recording, prepping, editing, and all of that to put together. If you found this valuable or interesting, I would love a donation to encourage me to keep producing these videos and to keep striving for more and more complex content and higher production value so that it's much more clear to everybody. You can provide a one-time donation via the PayPal link below, or if you want to set up a recurring subscription, you can sign up for my Patreon. In either case, it would be much appreciated. And if you're strapped for cash at current, sharing, commenting, or discussing my videos is always a free way to support this information. What comes next? Well, I would like to tackle those unanswered questions that I left at the end. If any of those topics seem interesting to you, leave a comment or reach out to me to say which one you'd like to hear about first or which ones you'd like to hear about more. As always, I appreciate your time and attention. Until next time, I'm Travis Lane, making important things make sense.